I am Cece Sweetie, and now these are three very experienced beekeepers that have very different ways of managing their bees, and I want them to each have the opportunity to introduce themselves, and then we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of spring management, because quite frankly, you know, it's a little awe-inspiring sometimes to see how at ease the seasoned beekeepers get their bees through the winter, and you know, have tricks and tips that sometimes we just don't hear or take the time to ask. So this is the time that we have to do that. So I'm going to have Steve talk first. I know it's tough, and I gave each of the panelists kind of a cheat sheet to kind of read off of, hopefully not. So go ahead and start with your name.
Well, the first thing I wanted to clear up is the dungarees thing. So I hear people asking me why I'm wearing these dungarees. So,
Can you hear me?
That's where I got to talk into the microphone.
Use your radio host.
Project the voice.
I didn't know.
I had no idea that was in there.
Say your name.
Steve.
Steve Owen. Been beekeeping about 10 years, 11 years. Last year we were up around 250 colonies in 14 different apiary locations. Waterford and Edinburgh are the primary locations of our hives. I would consider myself a sideliner beekeeper because I work a 40-hour-a-week job so I can afford to be a beekeeper. And most interested in beekeeping for all of the honey making wax products, pollination, queens, and other. Explain. This cheat sheet's really good, Cece.
Hey, I tried.
Okay, so what are you most interested in beekeeping for? Is it simply a hobby, or do you actually make money
Well,
at
no, I'm a
it?
sideliner. We do make some money doing it.
What we just described a sideliner as?
A sideliner? How would I describe that? Someone that works pretty hard to try and chisel a couple bucks out of keeping bees.
Well, I hate to dissuade you on that, but honestly, a sideliner is typically anywhere from 30 to 75 colonies that works a
I'm a
full-time
commercial
job.
guy then.
So you're kind of in between sideliner and commercial. Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
Go ahead.
What do I do different from other beekeepers? I'm really not sure. But I guess we're going to figure that out as we have our discussion here today.
That's right. And any special developments that you've had in the last year?
Well, this is where you wanted me to talk about the
This
bees
is
that we brought in.
where I would love for you to talk about your Texas bees.
So we've been wholesaling to Wegmans for 7 or 8 years, and a bunch of smaller stores and farm markets. And last last fall or early winter 2021, not last year ago, Giant Eagle contacted us, interested in not only our honey, but also lip balms and moisturizers and basically our whole line of products, what we make. We were very excited at the opportunity, although it was quite an adventure to go through their rigmarole of getting set up and approved as a vendor. Once we did that, they let us know that, you know, initially right out of the gate, we would be in 6 stores. So as I started looking at the inventory of buckets of honey, estimating what we might get in the spring, and of course, as we all know, the weather and a million other things can affect your production, made a decision that we needed to do something to bump the production up like significantly. And you know, we thought about equipment and going down south and buying nukes or buying packages. The more I looked at it, I ended up stumbling across this company called Wild Creek. I get it down here somewhere. Desert Creek Bulk Bees out of Texas. The owner is a young man, Blake Shook. And the company runs 5,000 colonies. They winter in Texas. They send a bunch of them out to almonds. And they head up to the Dakotas for honey production over the summer. And we made a decision to buy 100 colonies out of the almonds and have them shipped into us. So,
Now, before that point, how many were you running?
we were running between 60 and 80 production colonies, plus the nucleus yarn.
So you're doubling.
Yeah, I mean, it was quite doubling. We have a pretty significant nucleus yard, but we went from 140, 150 up to 250 colonies last year. And it was an adventure. The bees were much stronger than what I anticipated when they showed up. My good buddy Kent took a few weeks extra to get out. He was a little busy. I don't know if anyone knows, when you bring bees in from out of state, the inspector has to come look at them. So we were kind of hung up for a few weeks. They showed up at the end of April. I inspected them all initially, and they all got 1.5 gallons of syrup in the in-hive feeder. Had a couple of queenless, but most of them were just 6 or 7 frames of brood and busting at the seams with bees. So it was an adventure. It was a lot more than Cheryl and I had ever dealt with, but we worked our butts off and did our best to keep up with it. Amazingly, what didn't swarm, we had issues with swarming. What didn't swarm produced pretty close to a 200-pound average just on the spring flow. So it was a real eye-opener to see how a really strong colony showing up here right at the beginning of flow, right when the honeysuckles bloom, the amount that they could produce was amazing.
So just for newer beekeepers, that's an equivalent of what, 3 to 4 supers apiece, 4 or 5?
Mediums, yeah.
Yeah, that's significant.
Yeah. So, I mean, it was a great deal as far as us being able to meet our obligation, the new obligation. What ended up happening later in the year is, I did mite washes on all of them when we got them, and it was onesies and twosies. By midsummer, we saw the mite numbers really starting to climb. I went through and treated them all with Formic Pro, and it's a 2-week treatment, and I went back 2 weeks later and did washes to verify that we had got rid of the mites, and sure enough, they still had too many mites. So I don't know if anyone knows the definition of insanity. It's doing the same thing over and over again. If it doesn't work, you got to do something different. Well, they were still bringing honey in, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to hit them with Formic Pro again. Maybe it was the temperature, maybe it was the humidity. I bought another round of Formic. I hit them all again with it. I went back 2 weeks later, and guess what? Still had mites. And I'm like, I should take these honey supers off and treat them with something stronger. But maybe it was 3 times. 3rd time's a charm, right? I definitely qualify as insane. Because we still had mite issues after the 3rd time treating them with Formic. And so what ended up happening is they were really phenomenal for us in the spring. But by the time goldenrod was blooming and going into winter, the virus load was high. And, we lost a good half of them.
Now, just for people that are not as familiar with mite treatments, formic acid is one of the few that can legally be put on the colony during honey flow. So if you have honey super that you're planning on extracting, it can still be used with it. There's very few other labeled products that you can do that with. Sorry.
Oxalic is now approved.
Correct.
And Now, I've avoided oxalic for years because when there's a lot of brood in the hive, oxalic is only effective on the phoretic mites, the ones that are on the adult bees. Formic is supposed to be effective on the mites that are in the capping, having their little orgy party going on in the capping. So formic has always been what we've used, and then after we harvest in the fall, typically we treat them all with Apivar, and they're nice and clean of mites in the spring. I invested in an instant VAP is the tool that we've got, and I've decided this year that I'm going to try and be sane instead of insane, and the oxalic acid is going to get added to our repertoire, and we're going to put packages in all those colonies we lost and get them going again.
How many did you go through winter with?
I mean, we're not quite through winter yet.
Right, but when did you start?
I mean, we lost a good 50 hives out of the Texas hives. Our stock, which were in separate yards, fared a whole lot better. But, it's been a rough year. I think the really dramatic warm weather and then just slammed with negative and back and forth kind of stuff has been, it's definitely a worse year than we typically have as far as our numbers. And I mean, I'm not going to say an exact number at this point because it's still winter time.
And you're doing this all while you're working a full-time job?
I do.
That is pretty damn impressive.
I've got help.
All right. Okay. Got help. Raise your hand, wifey. There's wifey. All right, we're going to pass it.
Cheryl's the one that made the award-winning Blanca wax that was so impressive at the Waterford Fair. So she's a class act artist as well. I'm Priscilla Hamilton. I've been beekeeping. How did I start beekeeping? It's all Fred's fault. So I retired from the Army in 2015. And moved back. And moved back to Erie, where I grew up here in Harbor Creek Township. And I'd always had an interest in kind of restoring my parents' family property and putting bees on it. So Fred encouraged me to take the backyard beekeeping class out at Asbury Woods, which I did with Charlie Schreck. And Charlie strongly encouraged being part of this organization, so I joined this as well. And this has been a wonderfully co-mentoring group here, if you haven't figured that out already. And so I'm going into my 7th year of beekeeping, and my average colonies somewhere between 4 and 10, variable from year to year, depending on swarms that I get from other folks that we try to capture. And I say we now because I got married last year to Gary Rafferty. Beekeeping as well, and he's been a great help and very interested and like a sponge for new information, which forces you as the quote expert to bone up your game, to read and be on top of what you're telling people. My general location, they're all at my parents' property, which is about 18 acres or so, and a pretty protected place. They've survived fairly well, I think, where they are located now. And Johnson's Nurseries is right to the north of me, so they've got plenty of feeding stock, and I let the field go natural with lots of goldenrod and aster, and then Gary planted about 5 swaths of pollinator-friendly seeds. We'll see if they come up. This is primarily a hobby for me. I come into this with St. Francis of Assisi, that I'm going to change the world and improve my pollination and have a little bit of honey to use and to sell. And all of those have come about as positive experiences. But I'm going to tell you, as you listen to me, do as I say and not necessarily as I do. Because beekeeping takes a lot of time. I'm admiring that you work a 40-hour week and can still do this. Because you have to have time to devote to this or you're not being true to your livestock. And my hives are not where I live, so I have to travel. That puts in another impediment. And you can't rush in to say, oh, I've got 90 minutes, I'll be able to do all my inspections and do my treatment. No, because you're going to rush through things, you're going to miss stuff, you're not going to document the way you should. And I don't document the way I should. I carry lots of notebooks, but that doesn't mean that anything gets written in them. And then a lot of times I get stuff, so I'm brand new to this, you get stuff and you don't know how to use it. For example, those cute little yellow books on hive inspections. That looks great, but it's like, I can't figure out how you want me to fill out this book. So it's not really useful to me. Using a regular book is fine, or take a lot of pictures. And I think this coming year, I'm going to use a digital recorder and put it in my, and talk as I'm doing my inspections, and that way I can capture the things and write them down, and that'll be a lot easier for me. And so I told you why I was interested in beekeeping. We do sell honey to, give honey to friends, sell them to more acquaintances, and people seem to appreciate the natural honey. But I'm not in it, we're not in this to make money. We figured out after our last extraction, there's no way you could charge enough money to earn money selling honey. And typical hive setup, usually it's 2 deeps and mediums is, or shallows is supers. I figure out the shallows are really not worth the effort unless you really have a back problem. And I'm also migrating into doing all mediums now. I do appreciate the standardization of equipment, but I have a whole barn full of mediums, and shallows, and deeps, and plastic foundation, and wire foundation, and that's the other thing. You need to avoid the new sparkly thing that shows up in your eyesight to run out and buy the next newest stuff. Take a breath.
What's the maximum number of colonies do you want to have in your apiary?
Well, right now, we had 9 going into winter, and we figured our last true look at them, which was December 30th, we had lost 3. 2 probably due to the Christmas Eve blizzard of 70-mile-an-hour winds, even though with the windbreak, the 2 to the west did fine.
I meant more, what's the maximum colonies do you want to have in your apiary at any given time? What's the top number for you?
Probably 12, probably a dozen, and sometimes I think people like to brag about how many colonies they have as a notch on their belt, or, little sideline you can put on the side of your car, how many colonies you have. Don't bite off more than you can chew, because these do take an effort, and if you're not paying attention, you're not being true to your livestock either. And what do I do that's different from other beekeepers? I think I'm pretty much in the midstream of everyone else. We're still trying to figure it out. The bees are a heck of a lot smarter than we are, and you just kind of can do the best you can. Do the best you can. Read if you can. Go to meetings like this. The state meeting, I've been to 2 or 3 state meetings. I found them to be very beneficial because they're from generally Pennsylvania. So, but the folks downstate are not where we live. And where I live is not the same where Ken Andrews lives. And so you've got a little micro environment where you are. You have to make your individual decisions based on where you are. And special developments or difficulties in the last year. Just paying attention and following up like I'm supposed to with more routine engagement. I'm not working anymore with a pay job, but I'm a super volunteer, which almost keeps me busier than when I was working. So it does take time.
You're a master gardener.
Well, Gary would say I was a slug because I'm a master gardener, but I'm involved in a lot of different things.
Thank you.
My name is John Brinke. I got started in beekeeping because of Jerry.
2005.
2007.
2007.
2005. So I've been involved for 17 years or so. And average number of colonies that I have, somewhere around 30 to 50. Went into winter this year with 52. And right before Christmas there with that windstorm that hit, I don't believe that my house was as sheltered from the wind as it should have been. So I lost just about everything in my house. So that's not good, but I still have probably around 25 left out of the 50, so not bad. So there is some things that I have changed, and I'll show you. This is typical setup that I have. I was running double deeps. And since last year in discussions with Charlie, we're changing from double deeps to a single deep and a medium. There's a queen excluder in here, which I normally take that out right before winter, and then I put a feed box on top of that. Now, there's something different about this here that I'm going to minute, but we'll go through the rest of the list and then I'll show you this. I'm considered a sideliner, but I do have 5 different apiaries. 2 in Cockerton, 1 at my house, and 1 at Hunter's Airport. And I also run the woodcock apiary, which we're going to be using for hives of heroes. And that we will probably need some helpers if somebody
And
is
also-
new
See how this
and
happens, that
wants.
flying finger of fate? That's how this works.
What's that?
The flying finger of fate, this volunteer stuff. Go ahead.
Ooh. A Hives for Heroes program is going to be, we're going to use the woodcock apiary to do that, so any beginner beekeepers that want to learn something, nukes, making queens, you name it, we can pretty much cover anything at that particular site. Okay? What do I do different from other? I guess I'm going to show you this. I run a brick on top of all of my colonies. This brick means something. So if I go into a colony, obviously, I do what everybody else does with the mite treatments. I use Formic Pro. Anytime I see a problem, it's either Formic Pro or oxalic acid. But if there's a problem with the hive, brick up. That means if I have 10 in the apiary, I know I need to go back to this and do something. Okay? Luckily, I still can remember just about everything that all of those hives. I only do one apiary at a time. So what's different about this particular box, it's all the same down here, 10 frames in the medium. I'm going to need someone to hold this. This is new. I just started doing this at Woodcock, and out the last 4 years at Woodcock, 3 or 4 years, Charlie, is that right? Most of the bees there, I had maybe 30% survival rate. This year, I just checked with this setup. I put honey underneath as my feeder. And then I wrap this bubble wrap around them and back down again. Obviously, this is not there. So they have their main brood chamber, they have their food, and then they have the extra that I give them. What's nice about this is, everybody knows that the bees, when they feed or they cluster and then they eat the honey above them. Well, once they get through this honey here, they're deflected up into the honey that I just put there. Now, up here, we still have the same setup as before. You can put this right on top, and you can feed again right on top of this without exposing your bees to the winter. On the sides of this on the top, you throw your wood chips. So this is all wood chips down along in here. Okay? So with that, this on top, if you notice bees here in the winter time and the spring, this time of the year, and they're clustered on the top, you know that they need food. You can take your candy bars, which is just full of sugar, put it on top, and then you cover everything back up as normal. Yep, this is from Fred. Where's Fred? This is from Fred. Put that right down to the top of that like that. Obviously, you're going to have another box on that to keep it, and that's the air barrier that we talked about before.
So do you wrap your hive boxes?
I have not wrapped them. I wrapped them last year. Didn't help me. So I'm like, it's not going to help. I'm just not going to try something different. So this is what I did different. And out of the 8 hives at Woodcock, all 8 are living. So 8 I like.
One thing to keep in mind with the bubble wrap stuff, the value, the insulation value tends to be poor if you don't have a air gap. So that's why this style is pretty impressive.
That's it. That's all I had. Any questions?
For beginning beekeepers, if you take the
Asbury Woods class, they're going to give you a little book,
Beginning with bees.
Beginning with Bees. It may be simple, but Beekeeping for Dummies is an excellent and it will actually show you how to put together your equipment. If you go and you buy stuff, and it's kind of like an IKEA product, some assembly required, but they don't give you instructions really on how to put it all together. So the first time I did it, I threw away all of those fences that come, because I didn't know what they were for, and I clipped off all the wires that came on the foundation, because I didn't know what I was supposed to use it for. This tells you what to do. So if you're going to start early, this is a pretty good priority.
Why don't you repeat that for yourself for a moment, and you can answer the first question. I have a series of questions just to start it off, and then we'll open it up to the audience. So you can ask for each one of them, or you can ask specific questions. But we're going to start with Priscilla. What type of equipment are you purchasing or need to repair before spring?
Go through and clean out any heavily soiled or dark frames. I'm starting to, I label now all of my frames and foundation that I install that are new. The stuff that's really crappy, got to get rid of them. And then this is going to be the first time of large-scale melting of wax, the scraping of a lot of the frames that we've disassembled and things, and so that can. My goal is to get to be like Cheryl, so I can get that big block of wax.
Now, do you have, are you getting equipment in order to melt that wax? Are you doing a solar panel or the solar box?
I'm harvesting stuff out of my mother's basement, and we bought some other things, and watched a lot of YouTube videos, and I'm intending that we're going to make another mess.
Yeah. Okay, any new boxes or anything like that?
I have all kinds of equipment yet to be assembled. So
what kind of equipment?
The woodware, I have deeps and mediums to be assembled, and Gary's got a great airtight pneumatic stapler, so that makes things a lot faster than nailing things in on your own. And working together, we'll establish more equipment. But it's repainting some things, some stuff over time. Your nails are going to come loose, so glue and screw if you can your your box corners, because there's a lot of stress on them, especially with cold and heat and whatever. And those boxers are heavy. That's the other thing. A deep box that's loaded is close to 100 pounds. So if you can't lift that and you're working by yourself, put that in mind. That's why a lot of people go to eight frame boxes and mediums, because of the weight involved. Don't hurt yourself.
Thank you. Okay, Steve, what kind of equipment are you purchasing or need to be repairing?
I don't think we're going to need to make a whole lot of equipment purchases this year. We added, we had locally made over 300 new stoopers last year that the bees from Texas actually drew out over 250 frames and made that quantity of honey that we talked about. So we're sitting on a pretty good supply of equipment. I will be bringing in some additional deep frames as the nukes go out and we replenish the nuke yard. We'll be needing the new frames to feed into the nucleus yard for the nukes that we produce this year.
What kind of nuke boxes do you use?
Homemade nuke boxes.
Love it. That's
High
great.
brain.
While you have that microphone, I have another question for you. What do you use on your woodware when you buy new woodware? What color? Stain, dip, the black wax dip, paint?
I would love to paraffin dip everything, but we're not to that point yet. And we just use an exterior paint, and I actually, 2 coats of exterior paint, and we like doing just different colors, so we kind of get the rainbow effect going on. We don't use anything really dark.
So you're a pastel man?
Although most of our bee yards are positioned where they get a nice dose of morning sun and some shade in the afternoon. We worry about the dark boxes overheating the colonies in the heat of the summer.
Awesome. And just so anyone's not aware, the paraffin dip is actually a very cool process where you need a big vat and you actually dip the entire box and get it completely coated. You can do it
Yeah, the
double
boxes
dip.
last forever.
They last forever, but it's very expensive. I think $60 a box or something crazy if you have someone else do it. Some Amish have the equipment to do it. It is significant, but if you think about the lifelong, if you're going to do this for 30 years, it might be worth the investment. So it just depends on what you're doing. John, what do you say? What type of equipment are you purchasing or need to repair?
Well, last year, the first thing I've done major is I bought a truck. I don't know if moving bees around in a van is a good idea, but a truck is definitely better.
Man always impressed me.
Yeah, there you go. So the truck is a big investment, and I do get a lot of replacement medium and full-size frames. I like the dark colors. So I always like to try to keep a empty or a brand-new set of everything in the truck at all times. So worst thing in the world is to go to an apiary and find out that you have 5 busted frames for some reason, and you don't have it, that you can put it right back in there. So investing in frames, I usually buy them in bulk, like 100 at a time. So, and that's the chore up until spring, is to keep that, the new full-size boxes made, keep all the frames intact, get everything ready to go, so that when the bees get here, you can just get to work on it.
So while you're holding that, I've got another question for you. What kind of stand do you use? Any regrets on the type of stands you use?
I just have 4x4s on concrete blocks. And then obviously the standard setup here is on top of that. Back up there again.
Yeah. So
it's a standard concrete blocks on 4x4s.
Okay, and any regrets with that?
No. I used to have it 2 concrete blocks, which was a little bit higher. And the only regret I had with that was lifting that off because it started to get too high. So, and I don't know, Charlie and I had one hive down there at the Cockerton site, the study yard. Remember the hive? It was like 11 hive. You had to stand on boxes or something to get those off. That was quite strenuous to get those supers off the top. So I think the lower the better, but you still need to have it high enough so skunks and critters don't get in there to disrupt the bees.
Okay. And Priscilla, what do you say
As far as hive stand,
as far as the hive stand is?
my apiary is kind of on the downslope, so I've moved in landscape cloth and gravel because of frost heaves, and then I have pallets with a concrete block, and then trying to make sure that they're level side to side and tip forward a little bit for water drainage. But my problem is because of a lot of moisture water that comes down, you could be mucking around like you're in a pigsty. Against your pigs. But it can almost knee-deep muck. And so finding in the springtime where the hives were not in the same alignment as they were when you put them to bed in the fall has been a challenge just with geography.
Freeze and thaw has a way of moving things. Primarily, we're keeping on pallets. We got 4-way pallets with the bees from Texas, and most of our yards, even the individual hives, are on pallets, and we'll use sheathing and 2x4s and whatever we need to shim them up to pretty much level. And most of them have a small drain hole in the bottom board. We use solid bottom boards, but they have a small drain hole in the bottom board so that if it doesn't happen to be leaning to the front, which is difficult if you have 4 hives on a pallet, 2 facing east and 2 facing west, you're going to tend to not have drainage out the front door all the time. So we typically have a small hole for drainage.
How small?
A pinky small.
Pinky small. Do you put anything over top of it, or?
No.
Nope. Okay, and
I lost my microphone here. All right, so when do you feed in winter, and when, if at all, do you feed pollen patties? Steve?
We feed in winter.
yes, sir.
We feed solid sugar blocks. We put a solid sugar block on all the colonies, followed by a pillow box with shavings above it. Nothing but 18 cups of sugar to 1 cup of water, I think. The sugar cake maker up there says yes. So we place a candy board. She presses the sugar into a 10 frame by 2 inch shim that has 1/2 inch hardware cloth stapled to the bottom of it with a few openings. She'll stand some blocks up in it so there's openings for ventilation through the sugar brick. We'll place those on the hive, and I duct tape them just because often when we're putting them on, we tend to harvest the fall honey pretty late after the aster freezes, so the bees may not have a lot of time to propolize. So we'll tape that sugar box on, and then we'll put it 2 inches of wood shavings above it. As far as any kind of pollen supplements, we don't feed anything like that over the winter. They just have the sugar there as an emergency feed if they make it through their spores and up to the top. We do, however, early in the spring, and how early varies greatly depending on what the weather's doing and what the long-term forecast looks like. We will feed a pollen substitute. For years we're using a spirulina algae substitute. The company in Ohio that was making them pretty much priced themselves out of a product. We had really good luck with it. This year we're bringing in the global pollen patties, which are made up in Canada. It's actually a 15% irradiated bee pollen that's used to make the patties. So what we do is we try and time, when we're confident that we're not going to have any really severe cold spells, we try and time it and get the pollen in there and start feeding syrup far enough ahead of when the flow usually starts, right around the beginning of May. So, depending on the weather, early April, mid-April, we'll start really trying to, and what we're doing is stimulating them to make more brood, because the more bees that are there when the honey flow starts, the more productive they're going to be.
And that's all logical. I made sure I had a whole super of honey right above the cluster when we headed in the fall. We checked them the 30th of December. We put hive alive patties on all of the remaining colonies that were alive. And it's time to check them again once we can get warm weather and I'm not sitting in a meeting somewhere, to check those and put sugar cake on. I do have sugar cakes left over that we chunked up, put them in the freezer and keep them so that I can put them back on when I need them. You go to Sam's and you buy the 25-pound bags of sugar at a time. That makes it a little more economical on making those sugar cakes. And there are plenty of recipes on how to do that. And then just as Steve says, it's just before we're going to get into the warmest weather or the start of blooming time, which could be variable. I mean, there are daffodils up at our church, and you see the oaks and things are starting to bud out already, but it will be 36 degrees on Sunday, so who knows. But just before March-ish, end of March's time frame is the time to check again for feed. And then for those of you who don't know, you can't have supplemental sugar syrup on if you are in a flow, because you can't really sell that honey. You are adding something that is not natural. So you don't feed if you've got a honey flow on naturally.
As far as pollen patties, I really don't use pollen patties at all. This is pretty much the setup that I have. And most of the time, if the bees don't have a full super of honey below, I will put a full super above it, and then I add this above that. So my feeding is straight honey. So they appear to like that. And then in the spring, when the weather starts to get a little bit better here in March, I do extractions. So all of the honey, wax, and all that product, I put in a huge cooler. And that cooler I roll out in the middle of my apiary, and I open that thing up as soon as they start flying. And it's just like a bee magnet, and they're all over that until the sun goes down. And then I close it back up, and every morning I'll go back and open it back
How
up.
close to the apiary do you have this open feeding?
That is just inside the fence, so it's not very far away.
Just so you know.
CC doesn't like it.
At least 30, 50 feet away from your apiary, please. You are very brave. You have to have very strong colonies to not get robbed if a frenzy starts like that.
Okay.
But you have strong colonies, so you're good.
Yep.
Okay, can you talk a little bit about upper venting in the winter?
Upper venting.
Upper venting.
Most of the time, the top cover, we put popsicle sticks up above the inner cover, and that seems to be working fine for me.
Okay.
So, a little more I can say about that.
What about you, Priscilla?
Every year's a new experiment, so it's not really good scientific method because we're adding too many variables. Usually I hand bend it, but thanks to Fred's presentation at the beef breakfast, I didn't bend it all this year. We taped everything down, so we'll see what happens.
We typically leave the inner cover all summer with the notch down so that they have an upper entrance to utilize. And when we prepare them for winter, the candy board, the candy boards that Cheryl makes have a 5/8 inch hole drilled in an uphill orientation going into the candy board on the front face of the candy board that lines up with where that colony was accustomed to their upper entrance. So when we place the candy board on, there is still a 5/8 round upper entrance, and what we found is without some sort of upper entrance in the wintertime, if you're not vigilant or able to get to all of your colonies to make sure the bottom entrances are opened up, if you get a warm spell and the bees want to cleanse and they can't get out, that can be a real issue.
Just so people are aware, there's been recent hubbub. If you ask 3 beekeepers something, you'll get 4 answers. Sometimes you'll get 6. But there is definitely a, what do you call, not conflict, but there's a
Active discussion.
very active discussion, yes. Controversy, thank you, that's the word. Tom Seeley, Dr. Tom Seeley has researched wild bees for a lifetime now, and his way of thinking is, why have a top entrance? The natural bees don't, so why are we doing that? And you're actually letting all that moisture that they need to metabolize the sugar that we're giving them, and they need it to process the honey that they're eating. So there's a little controversy going on, so a lot of us is trying both ways. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next thing. What is your dead out procedure? So you have dead bees. What do you do with them? Okay.
Open it up, pull all the frames, clean everything out, pull anything that has honey or pollen, sort through the frames to select the frames that you believe are going to be best suited for restarting the colony, and put it back together and put some new bees in there.
Do you try to diagnose the reason?
Well, yes. Well, I mean, there's a lot of things to see. You know, if they've gone to the top and burned through their food sources, and all their little heads are buried in the comb looking for food, you didn't have enough food on the hive. And the interesting thing is that the bees, as they cluster together in the winter, they're going to primarily just move straight up in an upward motion above themselves. So, you know, just having weight in there doesn't necessarily mean they had access to food. Like John's set up here, he's targeting putting food right above them, or funneling the bees from one side if they happen to be on the side.